Picture this. It's a Tuesday afternoon in October. I'm standing outside a glass-paneled office building in downtown Chicago, 32nd floor, my name on the door, my company's logo embossed in brushed gold on the wall behind my desk. I'm wearing a blazer I bought with money I earned, carrying a bag that took me 2 years of deliberate savings to afford. Not because I needed to prove something, but because I finally understood what it felt like to want something and work for it. I step into the elevator, the doors close, and then they open again on the lobby, and there he is. He looks the same, a little older, a little smaller somehow, though he hasn't lost an inch in height. He's wearing the same brand of sneakers he always wore when he thought he was doing well. He sees me, and I watch something move across his face, something complicated, something I don't have a word for, but I recognize it immediately. It's the look of a man doing math he didn't expect to have to do. He smiles. It takes him a second too long to get there. "Wow," he says, "you look really good." I smile back, genuinely, without hesitation, without a single rehearsed line, without the fantasy speech I used to replay in my head at 2 a.m. when I couldn't sleep, when the hurt was so loud I couldn't hear anything else. "Thank you," I say, and I mean it, because I do look good, not because of him, not despite him, just because of me. Because of everything I chose to do when he told me I had no options, because of the version of myself I decided to become when he made me feel like I should be grateful just to exist in his orbit. I didn't scream, I didn't fight back, I didn't craft the perfect, devastating comeback or wait for karma to show up. I just became someone he never expected. And that is the only story worth telling. This story isn't about revenge. It never was. Revenge would have required me to keep thinking about him. Revenge would have kept him at the center of my story, and that is the one thing I refused to allow. This is a story about becoming, about what happens when you take the worst thing someone ever said to you and you use it as fuel, not to burn them, but to build yourself. About what it looks like to go from the person who couldn't imagine a life beyond someone else's approval to the person who walks into an elevator and doesn't need anyone's validation to feel whole. If you're watching this and you've ever been told you're not enough, not smart enough, not pretty enough, not ambitious enough, not lucky enough to deserve better, this video is for you. Stay with me. And if this story lands the way I hope it does, if it gives you even one moment where you think, okay, maybe I can do this too, please subscribe, hit the bell, because I'm going to keep telling stories like this one. Stories about people who were counted out and chose differently. Stories about the quiet, unglamorous, devastating beauty of starting over. Let's go. I need to take you back, not because I enjoy living there, I genuinely don't, but because you can't understand what the climb looked like without first understanding how deep the hole was. I was 26 years old. I had a job I hadn't chosen so much as landed in, administrative coordinator at a mid-sized marketing firm. It paid the bills, barely. I was living in a 1-bedroom apartment with a radiator that screamed every night at 3 a.m. and a view of another building's brick wall. I had a college degree I'd worked hard for and almost never used. I had friends I'd slowly stopped calling because I didn't want to explain why I felt so stuck. And I had Daniel. I want to be careful here, because this isn't a story about villains. Daniel wasn't a monster. He was charming and funny and attentive in the beginning, the kind of person who made you feel, in those first few months, like you were the most interesting person in any room. He had strong opinions about everything: music, restaurants, politics, people. He was decisive in a way I found magnetic, because I was still figuring out what I thought about most things. We'd been together for almost 3 years when I started noticing the pattern. It didn't happen all at once. It rarely does.
It was more like a slow reframing of reality, the way a conversation would end with me questioning something I'd been certain of 5 minutes before, the way his opinions would gradually become my opinions, not because he forced them on me, but because I had learned, without quite realizing it, to defer. He was older than me by 7 years. He had more money, more professional experience, more confidence, and he used that, not always intentionally, I think, to position himself as the authority on my life. "You're not really a business person," he told me once when I mentioned I'd been thinking about launching something of my own, a side project, nothing dramatic, just an online service I thought I could build around a skill I had. "You're more of a support role type. That's not an insult. Some people are just better behind the scenes." I nodded. I think I even agreed with him. That's the part that's hardest to admit. Not that he said it, but that I believed it. That by that point, I had been so thoroughly marinated in his version of me that I had stopped being able to see myself clearly. He had a whole vocabulary for it, things that sounded almost like compliments on the surface, but left you feeling smaller when you unpacked them. "You need someone to look out for you. It's a good thing you have me, you'd be a mess on your own. You're lucky, babe. Most guys would have lost patience with you by now." Lucky. He used that word a lot. Lucky to have him. Lucky he was patient with my scattered thinking. Lucky he helped me navigate decisions because I tended to overthink. Lucky, 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 as if I had stumbled into a relationship with a benefactor rather than chosen a partnership with an equal. And the cruelest part is that I had stopped knowing where his voice ended and mine began. When I tried to think about my future, his assessment of my capabilities was the first thing that showed up, before my own instincts, before my own evidence, before anything I actually knew to be true about myself. I was 26 years old, and I was living inside someone else's definition of me.
The breaking point, or really the beginning of the breaking point, came on a Sunday night in March. We'd had dinner with his colleagues. I had spent the whole meal being careful not to say anything too strong, careful not to seem too eager, careful to laugh at the right moments and stay quiet at the right moments. I had become a very skilled editor of myself. On the drive home, I made a comment about one of the people at dinner, something about their work, something I found genuinely interesting. I can't remember the exact words, but I remember what he said. "You don't really understand that world, you were just agreeing to sound smart." Something in me went very still. Not hurt, not angry, just still, like the moment before a storm when all the air gets heavy. I didn't say anything, but something had cracked. Not broken, just cracked. A hairline fracture in the version of reality I had been inhabiting. I lay awake that night thinking about the comment, turning it over, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't accept it automatically. I thought, was that true? Not in the way I usually asked the question, desperately looking for reassurance, but clinically, like a scientist examining data. And the answer I came to, quietly, alone in the dark while he slept next to me, no, that was not true. And that's when everything started to change. We broke up 6 weeks later. I want to be honest with you, I didn't end it dramatically. It wasn't a scene. It was a quiet, painful conversation that lasted 2 hours, in which I said I needed something different, and he said he wasn't surprised because I was always a little too emotional to handle real partnership. He said it with such certainty, like he was reading from a report. And then he said it. "You'll be fine, but you're going to struggle without someone to guide you. You're not built for this alone." I walked out of that apartment and sat in my car for 45 minutes. I didn't cry. I couldn't. It was like the grief was too big for tears. It just sat in my chest like a stone. What I felt, underneath the pain, was something I didn't have a name for yet. It took me months to identify it.
But sitting in that car, at that specific moment, I felt something shift at my very center. Not rage, not resolve, not even hope. Just a question. What if he's wrong? 3 years of being told I was lucky. 3 years of being quietly convinced that my instincts were unreliable, my ambitions were unrealistic, my judgment was a liability. 3 years of editing myself smaller and smaller until I fit inside the shape he decided I belonged in. What if he was wrong about all of it? I drove home. I sat on my apartment floor, the one with the screaming radiator and the brick wall view, and I opened a notebook. I didn't write anything big. I didn't write a plan or a manifesto. I just wrote a question at the top of the page. Who would I be if I stopped believing what he believed about me? I stared at it for a long time. Then I wrote the first answer. I want to be clear about something before I go further. The decision I made in the weeks after that breakup was not about Daniel. It was not about proving him wrong. It was not about making him regret anything. Because here's what I've learned, and what I want you to really hear if you're sitting with pain right now. When you build your transformation around someone else's acknowledgement, when the whole point is for them to see, you hand them the power again. You make yourself dependent on their reaction to feel like it was worth it.
That is not freedom. That is just a different cage. The decision I made was entirely, ferociously, uncomplicatedly mine. I decided I wanted to find out who I actually was, what I was actually capable of, not because I had something to prove to Daniel, but because I had spent 3 years not finding out, and that, it turned out, was the thing I couldn't forgive. Let me tell you what the first month looked like, because nobody talks about this part. People love the transformation montage, the before and after, the moment someone walks in looking radiant while a sad ex-boyfriend stands slack-jawed in the corner. But the first month is ugly. I cried in the shower every morning for 2 weeks. I called my sister at hours that were unreasonable. I went back through 3 years of memories looking for the moments where I had made myself small, and every time I found one, the grief hit again, not for him, but for myself, for the girl who had talked herself out of her own instincts because she was so afraid of being abandoned. I ate badly. I slept too much some nights and not at all on others. I had long stretches of feeling like I was standing in an enormous empty space with no map. And here is what I also did. I started going to therapy, 3 weeks after the breakup. My therapist, her name is Dr. Renata, and she is one of the reasons I am sitting here telling you this story, asked me in our very first session, what would you have done differently if you'd believed in yourself? I burst into tears, because the answer was everything. I would have asked for that promotion 2 years earlier. I would have started the side project. I would have had the conversation about where the relationship was going instead of being told. I would have disagreed more. I would have taken up more space. I would have trusted the part of me that kept quietly whispering that something was off. Therapy was not a quick fix. It was, and this is important, the slowest, most demanding work I have ever done, more demanding than anything that came later, because all the external transformation I built was only possible because of the internal reconstruction I did first, in that room, 1 session at a time, learning to hear my own voice again. But here's the thing about doing the internal work. You don't see the results immediately. You don't emerge from therapy one Tuesday morning a new person. You emerge slowly, able to notice things you couldn't notice before, able to ask better questions, able to catch the moment you're about to defer when you should be deciding. I want to give you real numbers because I think they matter. I went to therapy every 2 weeks for 18 months. I kept a journal, consistently, not perfectly, for 2 years. Those are not glamorous commitments. They are boring and uncomfortable, and sometimes you go to a session and it feels like you made no progress at all. But I am telling you, the foundation of everything I built rests on those hours. Now, the external decisions. Approximately 8 weeks after the breakup, I had a conversation with myself that I remember very clearly. I was on a walk. I had started walking every morning, just 30 minutes, just to have something that was mine. And I was thinking about that question I'd written in my notebook. Who would I be if I stopped believing what he believed about me? And I thought, there's only one way to find out. The side project I had mentioned to Daniel, the one he'd dismissed with, "You're not really a business person," it was a content strategy and brand consulting service. I had been doing elements of this work informally for years. I had a specific skill set. I understood how to help businesses communicate. I understood voice and tone and audience. I had done it all my career, just not for myself, and not for money that reflected its value. I knew things. I had always known things. I had just allowed someone else's opinion to drown that knowledge out. I spent the next 4 weeks in research mode. Every evening after work, instead of watching TV or scrolling my phone, I sat at my kitchen table and studied. I read about freelancing and pricing structure. I took a free course on business fundamentals. I devoured every interview I could find with women who had built something from nothing. I made notes. I made lists. I revised the lists. I was terrified. I need you to hear this. I was terrified for a very long time. The fear did not go away before I started. I did not find some magic confidence that made the first steps easy. I took the first steps while I was afraid, because I had finally realized that waiting to feel ready was just another form of staying small. 4 months after the breakup, I landed my first client, a small e-commerce brand run by a woman I'd met through a mutual friend. The project was modest, a content audit and a 3-month strategy document. She paid me $1,200.
I remember staring at that payment confirmation like it was a Rosetta Stone, because it wasn't just $1,200. It was evidence. It was data that contradicted the story I had been told. I had taken a skill, packaged it, priced it, communicated its value, negotiated a rate, delivered the work, and someone had paid me for it, without anyone guiding me, without anyone looking out for me, without being lucky. Now, I want to be honest with you about the gap period, because it lasted a long time and it was not linear. In the 6 months between that first client and building something that felt genuinely stable, I had 2 projects fall through. One client I did full work for was late on payment by 45 days. I underpriced myself badly on 3 different engagements and then had to figure out how to correct that without losing relationships. I worked evenings and weekends while keeping my day job, which meant that for a solid 9 months, I was running on about 6 hours of sleep and a lot of green tea. I made mistakes, real ones. I overpromised on a deliverable timeline. I lost a prospective client because my proposal wasn't specific enough. I had one bad month where I earned almost nothing from the side work and had a genuine conversation with myself about whether this was realistic. I didn't quit. And here is why I didn't quit, and this is the piece I want you to hold on to. It wasn't because success was guaranteed. It wasn't because I had certainty. It was because I had made a commitment to finding out who I was without a ceiling, and quitting would have put the ceiling back in. I had a rule. Whenever I hit a wall, a rejected pitch, a silent email, a project that went sideways, I was allowed to feel bad about it for 24 hours, 1 full day. I could be frustrated, disappointed, defeated, and then I had to identify one thing I would do differently. That rule saved me more times than I can count. I also built my first real support system in this period. Not people who agreed with everything I did. I was done with dynamics that required me to be validated. I built relationships with 3 other women in adjacent fields who were building things of their own. We met virtually every other week. We showed each other our work,
called out our blind spots, celebrated genuinely, and asked hard questions of each other. I had never had that before. I had had relationships, I had had friendship, but I had never had people who looked at me and said, "I think you're capable of more than you're currently doing, and here's why," without any agenda, without any score being kept. That changed me. And that's when everything started to change. 14 months after the breakup, I left my 9 to 5. I want to tell you that moment was triumphant, a fist in the air, walking out into sunshine moment. And there was something like that. I did cry on the drive home from my last day. But mostly what I remember is the terror, and underneath the terror, completely indescribable, the feeling of having jumped from a very tall place and discovered that I had been right about the wings. My business, at the point I left my job, was generating approximately $5,800 a month in consistent revenue. I had 6 clients on retainer. I had a wait list of 2 additional companies who wanted to work with me. Not luck, choice, and work, and choosing again, and working harder, and falling down, and getting up, and doing it again. The visible changes came first, and I want to talk about them not to be vain, but because I think they tell a story about what happens when you start occupying your own life fully. I started taking care of my body differently, not because anyone told me I should, not because I was trying to look a certain way for anyone, but because I was putting serious demands on myself, and I needed my body to meet them. I started running, 3 miles 3 times a week, which eventually became 5 miles, and then a half marathon 14 months after that. I changed how I ate. Not a diet, not a deprivation protocol, but a genuinely curious relationship with what made me feel strong and clear-headed. I started sleeping like sleep was serious, because it is. I started treating my mental bandwidth like a resource I was responsible for. I cut out the scrolling and the noise and the endless ambient consumption that had been filling the silence I was afraid of. I bought things I had always waited for permission to buy. A desk that was the right height, a coffee maker that worked properly, a coat I had looked at for 2 years and never purchased because spending on myself had always felt unjustifiable. These things sound small. They are not small. They are the physical, daily enactment of the belief that your own life is worth investing in. The invisible changes were harder to quantify, but I felt them more profoundly. The most significant was this: I stopped needing to know in advance what people thought of me before I acted. For most of my adult life, certainly through my relationship with Daniel, I had unconsciously run a kind of mental survey before every decision. Would he approve of this? Would this look stupid? What does this say about me to people I respect? It was exhausting in a way I hadn't known was exhausting because I'd never experienced the alternative. The alternative was this: deciding based on what I thought was right, and then finding out afterward how it landed. It sounds obvious. It is not obvious. It is a skill that takes real practice, and I was genuinely bad at it for months before I started getting good at it. The second invisible change was the way I handled failure. Old me would have internalized a failure as evidence of a fixed truth. A rejected pitch meant I wasn't a business person. A bad month meant Daniel had been right. A hard conversation I hadn't handled perfectly meant I was too emotional to be taken seriously. New me treated failure like information, specific, context-dependent, useful information. The rejected pitch needed a different framing. The bad month needed a better pipeline strategy. The hard conversation needed different language. These were problems with specific solutions, not indictments of my fundamental worth. About 18 months after the breakup, people started noticing something was different about me. I want to be specific about this because I think it matters. A former colleague reached out to me, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, because she had seen some work I'd published online and wanted to know if I was available for a project. She said, "I always thought you were talented, but whatever you're doing right now, you seem different. More there." More there. I thought about that phrase for a long time because it was exactly right. I was more there than I had ever been.
I was inhabiting my own presence fully for maybe the first time. I wasn't monitoring myself, editing myself, running the background calculation of how does this read to someone else. I was just there, in the conversation, in the work, in the room. That quality is magnetic, not in a performance sense, in a genuine people can feel it sense. Clients began referring me without being asked. My rates increased, my confidence in negotiations grew. I started having conversations I would have avoided 2 years earlier about scope, about compensation, about what I needed from a professional relationship to do my best work. I became someone who asked for what she needed and got it. The moment that crystallized my internal shift happened on a random Wednesday, about 20 months after the breakup. I was in a client meeting, a larger company than I was used to working with, the kind of room that would have made old me shrink back and overqualify every sentence. Halfway through the meeting, their marketing director pushed back on something I'd proposed, firmly, a little dismissively, in the way people sometimes test you when they're deciding how seriously to take you. Old me would have backed down immediately, would have apologized for the confusion and revised the idea into something safer, smaller, less challenging. Instead, I paused, I took a breath, and I said clearly and without apology, I hear the concern. Let me explain the reasoning and then you can decide whether it changes your thinking. And I explained it, precisely and with confidence. Not aggressively, I wasn't trying to win anything, I was just being present and direct, and trusting that my thinking was worth the floor. There was a pause in the room, and then the marketing director nodded slowly and said, "Okay, that actually makes sense, let's move forward with it." I drove home from that meeting and sat in my parking garage for a few minutes. Not because I was overwhelmed, because I was savoring it, the specific, irreplaceable feeling of having trusted myself in a high-stakes moment and having been right, of having had the thought, I know what I'm talking about, and acted on it instead of suppressing it. Daniel had told me I wasn't built for this alone. That Wednesday afternoon in my parking garage, I knew with absolute certainty, not with anger, but with the cleanest, quietest, most permanent kind of knowing, that he had been wrong. And that's when everything started to change. The next 12 months were the fastest of my life. I brought on my first employee, a part-time project coordinator who is still with me today. I restructured my service offerings based on what I had learned about where I created the most value. I spoke at a small industry event and was asked back for a larger one. I was featured in an online publication about women building businesses in the creative services space. My revenue in my second full year of operating the business was $148,000. I'm going to say that number again, because when I think about the girl who sat on the floor of a one-bedroom apartment wondering if her ex was right about her, I need her to hear it. $148,000, built from a skill I was told I didn't have, a business I was told I wasn't capable of, a life I was told I needed a guide to navigate. I navigated it myself, not perfectly, not without setbacks, not without nights when I questioned everything and mornings when I had to drag myself back to the work because the feelings were louder than the goals. But I did it. I did it without anyone telling me I could. And that, the doing of it without permission, without validation, without the safety net of someone else's belief in me, is the part I am most proud of. Not the number, the doing. Let me take you back to that elevator, because that is where all of this has been heading, and I want to tell you what really happened, all of it, not just the cinematic version. It was October, almost exactly 3 years after the breakup. I had been in a meeting in the building for most of the afternoon, one of the largest client conversations I'd had at that point, a hospitality brand that was looking at a significant year-long engagement. The meeting had gone well. I knew it before they told me it had gone well. I had learned to read rooms. I stepped into the elevator, checked my phone. Revenue notification from a retainer renewal.
one of my favorite sounds in the world. The lobby. The doors opened, and there was Daniel. I want to tell you exactly what I felt in that first second, because it surprised me. Nothing dramatic, no adrenaline flood, no scrambling to compose myself. I saw him, recognized him, and felt genuinely something between mild interest and warmth. The warmth surprised me most, like seeing someone you knew a long time ago in a different chapter, curious a little, nostalgic in a distant way, but not wounded, not braced, not afraid. He saw me, and yes, I saw it on his face, that complicated math I mentioned at the beginning. His eyes did the thing eyes do when someone is taking inventory. The blazer, the bag, something about how I was standing. He was recalculating. "Wow," he said, "you look really good." "Thank you," I said. And then, "How are you?" Genuinely, I was genuinely asking. He told me he was between jobs, going through a transition. He mentioned a relationship that had recently ended. There was something in how he said it that was a kind of fishing. I recognized it from years of watching him perform confidence to cover uncertainty. He asked what I was doing. I told him, briefly, the business, the work I was focused on, enough to be honest and not a word more, because I wasn't telling it to make him feel anything. I was just telling the truth. And then he said something I didn't expect. "I always knew you had it in you," he said. "I just think, at the time, you needed more time to grow into it." I looked at him for a moment. I thought about everything I had done, the early mornings, the bad months, the therapy sessions where I cried and had to put myself back together to go back to work, the clients I had lost and fought for and earned, the 3 years of building something from the ground up in the absence of anyone who expected me to do it. I thought about the way he had said lucky, and I made a choice in that moment about how to respond. Not the choice I might have made 3 years ago, not the choice fueled by the need to win an argument or rewrite the narrative or make him understand the full scope of how wrong he had been. I made the peaceful choice, because that's what I had, peace. "I appreciate you saying that," I said, and I meant it. Not because he was right, he wasn't right, he wasn't there, he had nothing to do with it, but the grace to receive a clumsy, face-saving compliment and not weaponize it back at him, that cost me nothing, and it was true to who I had become, someone who didn't need to extract recognition from the people who had underestimated her. We said goodbye. It was comfortable, almost boring in the best way. No fireworks, no devastating final line, no moment where I turned slowly and said something that would play well in a movie. I walked out of the building into a cool October afternoon, and I thought, this is the moment I used to fantasize about, and it is completely different from the fantasy. In the fantasy, the moment was about him, his expression, his regret, his understanding of what he lost. In the fantasy, I needed something from him, acknowledgement, apology, the specific look that would tell me I had won. In reality, I needed nothing, not because I was performing indifference, but because I had genuinely, completely stopped needing his verdict on my life. Here is what I've come to understand about the encounter with someone who underestimated you. It is only satisfying when you have already had the real victory, and the real victory is internal. The real victory is the moment you stop needing the encounter to complete anything. It is the moment you realize that the best version of you was never built to impress one specific person. It was built because you deserved it, because you were curious about what you were capable of, because you looked at the shape someone had tried to press you into, and you decided, quietly, without drama, without announcement, that you weren't going to fit.
Daniel was not the reason I built what I built. He was the occasion, the specific moment when the voice that had been whispering, "What if you're more than this?" finally got loud enough that I had to listen. The people who doubt you are not obstacles. They are, and I mean this without bitterness, useful. Because every time someone draws a ceiling over your head, you have a choice. You can accept the ceiling, or you can decide it belongs to them and not to you. I decided it belonged to him. There is a second part to the encounter story that I don't always tell, and I want to tell it now because I think it matters. About 3 weeks after running into Daniel in that lobby, I got a text, his number, which I had never deleted, a casual, friendly message. "Hey, I've been thinking about our conversation. Would love to catch up properly. Coffee sometime?" I sat with that message for about 10 minutes, not because I was tempted, I wasn't, not even slightly, but because I wanted to understand what I felt when I looked at it. What I felt was nothing that required action. Not rage, not satisfaction, not even triumph, just clarity. The clarity of someone who knows exactly where they are going and doesn't need to take a detour back to somewhere they've already been. I didn't respond with a crushing line. I didn't craft something perfect and quotable. I just didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, out of honesty, because there was nothing there that served the life I was building, and I had learned, hard, that protecting the direction of your energy is not a small thing. It is the entire thing. My sister asked me much later if I ever told him the specifics, the numbers, the business, the half marathon, the speaking engagements, the version of me that had come true. "No," I said. "Doesn't that bother you?" she asked. "That he doesn't know?" I thought about it. "He'd probably rewrite it in his head anyway," I said. "Make it about something he helped me learn. And honestly, let him. What I know about it is enough." She laughed. Then she said, "You're really different, you know." I know. And that's when everything started to change. I've been sitting with this story for a long time before I decided to tell it. Not because I'm ashamed of any part of it, I'm not, but because I wanted to make sure that what I gave you wasn't a fantasy, wasn't an Instagram caption stretched to 60 minutes, wasn't the kind of story that makes transformation look easy or inevitable or guaranteed. It is not easy. It is not inevitable. There are people who go through what I went through and don't come out the other side, not because they lack something essential, but because the work is genuinely hard, and life is genuinely hard, and starting over when someone has spent years convincing you that you can't is one of the most demanding things a human being can do. So I want to leave you with what actually helped, not inspiration poster wisdom, real things. The first, get your internal work in order before you expect your external life to shift. I went to therapy. That is my specific answer. Yours might look different. Journaling, coaching, a conversation with someone you trust absolutely, a support group, a course that gives you language for what you're experiencing. But do the work of understanding why you accepted someone else's version of you. Because if you don't understand the mechanism, you'll find another Daniel. You'll find a different context, a boss, a friend, a family member, who offers you the same ceiling, and you'll accept it again. The transformation isn't in your circumstances, it's in your relationship with yourself. The second, start before you're ready. The version of you who is ready to start is a fiction. She does not exist. She will not appear before you if you wait long enough. What appears instead, if you wait long enough, is regret. And regret is much harder to work with than fear. Fear is just information that something matters to you. Move toward it. The third, protect your energy from people who need you to stay small. This is not cynicism. This is physics. You have a finite amount of energy.
The amount you spend managing relationships with people who undermine your confidence, dismiss your instincts, or make you feel like you're lucky just to be in the room with them, that energy is not available for building. Guard it accordingly. The fourth, measure yourself against who you were last year, not against who someone else is right now. This was the rule that saved me during the hardest parts of the middle, when I was tired and scared, and doing work that hadn't paid off yet, when I saw people who seemed further ahead, when I wondered if the whole thing was a mistake. I went back to where I was 12 months before, and almost every time the distance was real, the progress was real. I was not in the same place. That knowledge, specific, documented, provable, was better fuel than any external validation could have been. And the fifth, the last one. The best revenge is living well, but only if you're doing it for yourself. If you're building a beautiful life in order to be witnessed building it, if the whole point is for someone specific to see and regret, you are still in the cage. You have just decorated it differently. Living well for yourself looks different. It looks like a Tuesday morning when you sit down to work and feel not proud exactly, more than that, aligned. Like the person doing the work and the person you always believed you could be are finally the same person. No gap between them, no performance, no audience required. That is the thing I found on the other side of the lowest point. A story of revenge, a story of becoming. And I am not done becoming. I don't think I ever will be. The business will grow or pivot or surprise me. The half marathons might become full marathons, or I might decide I hate running after all. The version of me in another 3 years will look at today the way I now look at the girl sitting on her apartment floor, with so much tenderness, with the knowledge that she was right to start. I was lucky, he said.
Moment with particular possibilities. There is luck in that sense, and I don't dismiss it. I am lucky to have had the access I had, lucky to have had a sister who picked up the phone, lucky to have met Dr. Renata, lucky to have found clients who took a chance. But luck in the sense he meant it, that I was fortunate simply to be chosen, that my value was determined by his willingness to see it, that without his guidance I would be nothing. That version of lucky? I am not that. I am the thing that happened when I stopped believing I was. What's your glow-up story? I mean it. I want to know. Not the polished version, the real one. The part that was ugly and hard and not cinematic at all. The moment you decided. The first step you took when you were scared. The version of you you're growing into. Tell me below, because I am building a community here, not of people who have it figured out, but of people who are figuring it out loud, together. If this video helped you feel even 1% less alone in your story, please share it. Not for the algorithm, though, okay, yes, also for the algorithm, but because someone in your life might need to hear exactly this today. Someone who has been told they're lucky just to have what they have. Someone who has forgotten that luck is not a substitute for worth. Send it to them, and I will see you in the next one. Go build something.